Montana Territory. Early spring of 1881, the wind carried the smell of thawed pine and old regret when Yates Kincaid rode into the valley. He crested the last ridge before the town of Alder Bend, his horse thick with dust, and his heart in a place he rarely let it go. The letter folded in his saddlebag had been opened and reread until the edges curled. It was short, written in a rushed hand, and signed by a woman he had not seen in nearly 6 years. "I know I owe the money. I will pay, just give me until summer. Please, for the children's sake." Yates had not come for the money, not really. Not since he saw that last line. He tied his gelding outside the old mill house where the dry goods used to be sold. A boy no older than 6 darted past him chasing a dog, bare feet thudding against the packed dirt. A girl followed, maybe 4. Same copper hair, same sharp chin. They giggled as they ran, sunlight catching in their small, lean shadows. Yates stepped inside the building. It smelled like flour and wood smoke. Behind the worn counter stood a woman pouring hot water into a chipped basin. Her back was straight, her sleeves rolled, hands raw from scrubbing. She turned when she heard him and her green eyes froze on his face. "Yates," she whispered, her voice cracked. "Hello, Calla." Calla Prescott set the kettle down too fast. Water sloshed. She wiped her hands on her apron and stepped around the counter, her breath catching. She was thinner than he remembered, and the soft curves of her youth had sharpened into angles. But her face lowered, her face still held that stubborn warmth that had once made him believe he belonged somewhere. "I thought you would send someone," she said quickly, "not come yourself." "I figured if I was owed nearly $300, Yates said, voice low, "I could at least come knock on the door. I told you I will pay." "I read the letter," he said, "saw the names in the margin." "Olivia and Owen," her shoulders tensed, "they are not yours." "I know," he said. "I did the math." Calla blinked, her jaw tightened. "Their father left 3 years ago. He was heading for Cheyenne and never came back. I waited, then I stopped waiting." Yates stepped closer. "I am not here to shame you, Calla." She folded her arms. "Then why are you here?" He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded page. "I want to make you an offer." She didn't take it. "What kind of offer? You owe me money." "That is true." He looked toward the open door where the children's laughter echoed. "But I also know how hard it is to raise young ones out here. There are wolves, whether men who take what they want." He paused. "So I thought maybe, instead of payment, you marry me." Calla stared at him like he had spoken in tongues. "I am not joking," Yates said. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I do not understand. You want what? A wife in exchange for a debt?" "I want a family," Yates said plainly. "I want safety for you and those 2 kids. I want to build something honest, and I do not want to see you break yourself trying to survive out here." She looked away, jaw clenched. "You do not love me." "I could," he said. Calla laughed softly, bitter. "You left me, remember? I went to fight. You told me to go. You never came back. You married someone else." Silence stretched between them. Outside, the girl Olivia maybe called for her brother. Calla rubbed her forehead. "This is madness." "I know," Yates said. "But sometimes madness is the only thing that makes sense." She looked at him then, really looked. The years had changed him. His jaw was rougher, his shoulders broader, but his eyes, blue as glacier water, were the same, and they were steady now, steadier than they had ever been. "You would take on another man's children?" she asked. "I would take on you," he said. "The rest comes with it." Calla's hands dropped to her sides. "I cannot give you much," she whispered. "I am tired. I have nothing left but them." "I have land near the Jefferson Fork," Yates said. "Half-broken cabin, good soil. I came back to rebuild it." "Why me?" she asked. "Because I never stopped thinking about you," he said simply. "And because I think you still look at me like you used to, like I might be worth something." Her lip trembled. She turned away, pressing her palm to her mouth. "I can give you a few days," he said. "Stay in the boarding house, think on it, I will not force you." Calla didn't answer. She turned back to the basin and began scrubbing again, her hands shaking. That night, Yates watched from the porch of the boarding house as she carried both children inside the mill house. Olivia clung to her neck. Owen was already asleep in her arms. Calla's steps were slow but steady. The next morning she knocked on his door as the sun rose. Her face was pale and serious. "I will do it," she said, "but not for the debt." Yates stood, heart thudding. "Then why?" Calla looked down. "Because I want to hope again, and because I want them to have someone who stays." Yates stepped forward and took her hand. It was cold and calloused, but she didn't pull away. "We will leave tomorrow," he said. "I will take you home." Calla nodded, and just for a second he saw the girl she used to be in her eyes, the one who once kissed him under the cottonwood trees and told him he was hers. Only now she was a woman. And this time she was choosing him as the man he had become. They rode out before noon, Owen on Yates's saddle, Olivia curled against Calla. The wind was softer, the sky wide and open ahead of them. And for the first time in a long while, Yates Kincaid felt like he was heading somewhere that mattered. The ride north took 3 days. The Jefferson Fork ran wide and cold, fed by snowmelt from the higher ridges. They followed a narrow trail along the river's edge, the children bundled close against the morning chill, and by the time Yates pointed to the narrow clearing ahead, Calla's fingers had gone stiff from gripping the reins. "There," he said. The cabin sat low in the slope, half tucked into a line of firs. Smoke curled faintly from the chimney. The roof sagged toward the east and the door hung crooked on its latch, but the walls stood. That counted for something. Calla didn't speak as they rode closer. Olivia had fallen asleep against her, breath warm through the wool of Calla's shawl. Owen, riding with Yates again that day, kept his eyes fixed on the woods like he was waiting for something to leap out. When they dismounted, Yates moved first. He stepped up to the porch, shifted his shoulder and pushed the door open with a grunt. A dull creak echoed inside. "It's not much," he said without turning. Calla stepped in behind him. The room stretched narrow and plain. Rough-hewn beams, a stone hearth black with soot, a table with one leg braced by a wedge of bark. Dust lay thick on every surface. Still, the floor held dry beneath their boots and no wind slipped through the chinking. "I'll clean it," she said, setting Olivia down gently. "You'll need to fix that door before next snow." "I will," Yates said. "We'll need another bedstead too. I'll ride into town for lumber." She nodded. Owen wandered in and tapped a finger against the flue. The iron clanged. He jumped back and looked at Calla. She gave him a small nod. He didn't cry. Yates crouched beside the hearth. "There's a cold cellar dug out beneath the back, still dry. I checked this winter." "Good," Calla said. "We'll need to smoke meat before the rains come." He looked up at her. "You still remember how?" "I never forgot," she said, brushing hair from her eyes. "There's a difference." They worked the rest of the day without much talk. Calla swept the floor with a bundle of pine twigs while Olivia trailed after her, mimicking each motion. Yates pulled the warped door down and planed the edge smoother before resetting the hinges with borrowed nails. Owen followed him, pointing silently at the square-handled hammer until Yates placed it gently in his small hand and showed him how to tap the metal flat. That evening, Yates set a kettle on the fire. He laid jerky in a pan with dried beans and a pinch of salt. Calla sat by the door, mending a rip in Olivia's sleeve. The children curled together on a pallet made from horse blankets and spare coats. "I'll build another room come summer," Yates said quietly, stirring the pot. "Separate sleeping quarters." "They're owed that." "Would you mind if I kept a small garden?" she asked. "There's slope enough behind the cabin. I'd like that." She paused, then added, "I can shoot if something threatens them." "I know," he said, "but I'll always go first." She set the needle down and looked at him. "You made this offer to help me, but I think you need saving too." He didn't answer right away. The fire cracked low and the scent of simmering broth filled the room. "I've had no place to belong since I left," he said finally. "This land was my father's. He died before I came back. I figured if I could put it right, make it livable again, it might make something right in me, too." Calla picked up the needle again, sewing in steady, even stitches. "You ever wonder what you'd be if nothing had come between us?" she asked. "I used to," he said. "Now I just want to know what we could still be." She didn't speak after that, but when the stew was ready, she served him first. Not out of duty, but with a quiet, deliberate grace that said she'd made a choice. That night, after the children slept and the fire burned low, Yates took the rifle from beside the door and stepped outside. The air was sharp with pine and distant snow. He walked the line of the clearing, boots sinking into the thaw-softened earth, and looked up at the stars. Behind him, light flickered through the chinks in the wall. He could see her shadow moving, tucking the blankets, smoothing the floor. It wasn't love yet, not fully. But it was something built of steadiness, of showing up, of not turning away, and that, he thought, was where love would begin. By the end of April, the snow in the timberline had thinned to crust, and the river ran high with melt. Yates stood knee-deep in the creek behind the cabin, hauling stones to line the garden Calla had begun carving from the slope. His shirt stuck to his back and mud clung to his boots, but his hands worked steady. When he paused to stretch, he saw her at the edge of the clearing, kneeling, fingers sifting through the thawed soil. She didn't look up when he approached. "You've got the rows straight," he said. Calla brushed dirt from her palms. "I used a cord and 2 stakes. My father taught me here, not in Missouri." She glanced toward the firs. "He brought us west when I was 12, thought the land would make us stronger." Yates crouched beside her. "Did it?" She pulled a weed from the earth and set it on the pile. "No, but it made me braver." He handed her a flat stone. "You never talked about him before." There wasn't much to say. "He drank too much, didn't stay long once Ma passed." She set the stone at the edge of the row, aligning it with the others. "I've been trying not to become like that, letting loss turn me mean." Yates ran a hand through his damp hair. "I've seen enough men like that. It's harder to stay soft when the world keeps taking." Calla stood and brushed off her skirt. "I think softness might be the only thing that keeps us human." Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and the children collected pine cones by the stoop, she brought out a tin box and set it on the table. Inside were a few buttons, a folded ribbon, and a yellowed photograph tucked in a strip of muslin. She passed it to him without a word. In the picture, a younger Calla stood beside a man with a wide hat and hollow cheeks. The children weren't in it. "He was already gone by the time Owen was 2, she said quietly. "Didn't even leave a note." Yates passed the photo back. "You stayed, that's what matters." She closed the tin. "I only stayed because I had to." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And now," Calla met his gaze. "Now I think I might want to." That night, after the children had gone to sleep and the fire had burned down to a glow, she stood by the window with her arms folded. Yates watched her from the doorway, holding 2 tin mugs. "It'll frost tonight," he said. "Hard ground come morning." "I covered the chutes," she answered. He handed her one of the mugs. It held brewed spruce and wild mint she'd gathered 2 days earlier. "Do you ever wish you'd taken a different trail?" she asked, not looking at him. "Plenty of times," he said. "But none of those trails would have led to this." She turned then, taking the mug. Her fingers brushed his, lingering long enough to mean something. "I'm not one for quick words," she said. "I can't promise I'll be sweet or easy." "I'm not asking that," he said. "I just want something real." Calla took a slow sip, then set the mug down carefully. "Then you should know I don't want to sleep in separate corners anymore." Yates's breath caught. I mean I want to be your wife in truth," she said. "Not just in name." He stepped forward slowly, as if afraid the moment might vanish. When he reached her, he didn't touch her right away. Just stood close enough that she could feel the warmth off his skin. "Not because of debt," he said. "No," she whispered. "Because you stayed. Because you let me be who I am." She took his hand, rough and calloused, and placed it against her cheek. He closed his eyes. Outside, the frost crept over the grass, silvering the edges of pine needles. Inside, the fire glowed low, and the cabin felt full for the first time in its long, lonely life. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. When he followed her toward the bedstead, it was with a quiet understanding that something had shifted, not sudden, not loud, but steady as spring rising from winter. And in the hush of their shared breath, a bond took root, one born not of rescue, but of recognition. By late May, the earth had warmed enough for the first shoots to rise. Calla knelt among them in the soft light of evening, her skirts gathered to the side, fingers brushing tender leaves of parsnip and cabbage. A crow passed low overhead, wings casting a brief shadow across the slope, and she paused, wiping sweat from her brow with the inside of her wrist. From behind the cabin came the steady rhythm of hammering Yates, finishing the lean-to he'd framed the week prior. He hadn't said much that morning, only pressed a kiss to her temple before heading out with Owen trailing quietly behind, a basket of nails gripped in both arms. Olivia stayed near Calla, gathering dandelion blooms into a small bundle she planned to press between pages of the almanac. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, Calla stood and stretched, her spine stiff from kneeling. She turned toward the house just as Yates came around the corner, shirt tied at the waist, sawdust clinging to the hair on his forearms. "I'll need another length of pine before I can brace the back wall," he said, brushing his hands together. "Might ride out early, cut it from the stand near the ridge." She nodded, then hesitated. "Take Owen, if you think he's ready. He's watching you, has been since the first thaw. He won't speak of his father, but I can tell he's measuring you against something." Yates looked toward the boy, who sat cross-legged beneath the porch steps, quietly carving a strip of wood with the small penknife Calla had let him use under her watch. "I won't try to replace anyone," Yates said. "But I'll show him what kind of man I am." Calla stepped closer. "That's all I want." After supper, Yates took the whetstone and sat by the hearth, sharpening the drawknife. The children played a quiet game of stones near the back wall, laying them in patterns and whispering rules Calla couldn't quite follow. She sat across from Yates, mending one of Olivia's socks, the needle glinting each time it caught the firelight. "You ever miss riding long distances?" she asked, eyes on the wool in her lap. He ran the blade down the stone slow and even. "Only when the air goes still like this makes a man remember the wind on his face." She looked up. "You think you'll ever leave again?" He set the knife aside. "Not unless you send me." "I won't," he nodded once. "Then I'll stay." Calla leaned back against the wall, arms folded, watching the flames twist in the hearth. "You ever think about building something more permanent, a schoolhouse maybe, a small chapel? There's families upriver and those children'll grow." "I've thought on it," he said. "Wasn't sure if I'd be here long enough to see anything like that through. You are now." Yates met her gaze, and something passed between them, quiet, certain. When the children had been tucked into their bedrolls and the hush of night settled around the cabin, Calla stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low, bright enough to silver the tops of the firs. Yates joined her moments later, wrapping a blanket over their shoulders both. She leaned against him, her head resting just beneath his chin. "They trust you," she said softly, "more every day. I don't take that lightly, I know." He kissed the top of her head, slow and sure. "You've given me something I thought I'd lost the right to want." Calla turned to look up at him. "What's that?" "A place to belong, a reason to be better." She reached up, fingers threading through the rough stubble along his jaw. "You already are." The porch creaked beneath them as the wind moved through the trees, stirring the scent of pine and damp earth. They stood that way long after the fire inside went to embers, their bodies pressed close, two people no longer holding their pasts at arm's length. In the hush of the Montana dark, with the world stilled around them, they found something neither had expected: peace, earned not through words, but through the slow, honest work of choosing each other day by day. The first calf was born in early June, slick with afterbirth and wobbling on new legs beneath the open sky. Yates found her just past dawn, tucked in the brush below the southern fence line. He crouched low, hand steady on her flank, and waited until her breathing eased. Calla arrived not long after, apron dusted with flour and her boots still damp from the morning dew. She knelt beside him without asking, cradling the calf's narrow head in her lap while Yates checked the mother's teats for signs of infection. "She's small," Calla murmured. "She'll catch up if the milk holds," Yates said. "Her lungs are strong." Calla glanced at him. "You always talk gentler around animals." They listen better than most folks, he said, and they don't talk over you. Something about the way she laughed settled deep in his chest. Not loud, not bright, but real, they walked back together, the calf trailing behind her mother, still unsteady but determined. As they crossed the pasture, Calla's hand brushed his once, then stayed there, her fingers curling around his. That evening she found him in the field behind the lean-to, rigging a pulley for hauling seed sacks. He didn't hear her approach until she spoke. "I had a letter today." He wiped his brow with the back of his forearm. "From who?" "My sister. She lives in Helena now, married a freight man. She heard I'd remarried." He set the rope down. "You tell her the rest." "I did. Told her I was safe, that the children are thriving, that I'm not just surviving anymore." He studied her face. "She believe it. She said she'll come before the first frost, bring her youngest. Wants to see the man who made me write that." Yates looked down, then smiled. "Hope she's not expecting someone finer dressed. She'll see what matters." Inside, Owen was bent over a piece of slate, tongue tucked into his cheek as he copied letters by firelight. Olivia sat cross-legged beside him, humming tunelessly as she sorted dried beans by color. The cabin had grown into itself, warm with use, corners softened by habit. It smelled of rising bread and pine smoke. Later, as they lay in bed and the wind moved across the roof, Calla turned toward him. "I've been thinking," she said, "about marrying proper with a preacher. You want that?" he asked. "I want it for them," she said. "So they'll remember the day it became real, not just quiet." Yates drew his hand down her back. "Then we'll ask Reverend Haynes when he comes through in August." She didn't answer right away, just pressed her mouth to his collarbone and breathed him in like he was something that grounded her. In August, they married beneath the cottonwoods near the creek. Reverend Haynes wore a patched coat and carried a cracked Bible, but his voice held steady as he led them through the vows. Owen stood beside Yates, solemn as a man grown, while Olivia scattered dried flowers from a tin pail Calla had painted with milk and ash. Afterward, they ate bread still warm from the hearth and blackberry preserves brought by neighbors who'd heard the news on the trail. Calla wore a dress she'd pieced together from old muslin and lace, and Yates, for once, had shaved close and wore a clean shirt she'd stitched the hem of herself. When the sky turned gold and the first stars showed, they walked down to the creek alone. She slipped off her shoes and stepped into the water, lifting her skirts above her knees as she turned to face him. "You never asked me if I loved you," she said. "I didn't want to press." "You didn't have to," she said, "but I do." Yates stepped into the water beside her, boots soaking, and cupped her face in his hands. "I love you, Calla. I think I did before I even understood what it meant." She kissed him then, slow and deep, and the water moved around their legs like the whole world was easing into place. By the following spring, the cabin had 2 more rooms and the garden stretched wide enough to feed 4 households. The children ran barefoot through the pasture, strong and loud, their laughter chasing the birds from the fence posts. Calla taught Olivia her letters, and Yates showed Owen how to brace a fence post against the wind. Sometimes, in the still hour before dusk, Calla would sit on the porch with her mending while Yates carved notches into the old cedar rail. Each mark meant something planted, something harvested, something healed. And when the nights grew long again, and the fire crackled low, they'd lie close beneath the quilts she'd sewn from every scrap of their life together, and he would press his lips to her shoulder and whisper her name like it was the only word he ever meant to say. They were not rich. The land still fought them, but they had each other, and the kind of love built not from declarations but from the quiet, daily choosing of one another, and that was more than enough. Forever.